In today's video for the Cadillac 472-500, I am going to talk about the 460 adapter plate. Now this was Larry Kruzak's idea, CMD, back when he was still in California in the 80s. And initially when he went to do this, he was trying to get the adapter plate cast. And he talked to a foundry at a show, and the guy went home and made it on his own without Larry, and suddenly there was adapter plates out there, and though it was Larry's idea, it wasn't his, he wasn't getting a cut of it, and he was way mad. So eventually he did come out with his own adapter plate. There's been at least 3, maybe 4 companies that have made adapter plates for doing this onto the Cadillac motor. And basically, what you have is a plate that drops onto in place of the intake, adapts you from 460 to Cadillac. So this bolts onto the Cadillac, and then you have the 460 bolt pattern. Now, this isn't perfect. The 460 is 4.9 bore center, and the Cadillac is 5-inch bore center. And so you have a slight mismatch on bore center and on bank offset, just a little bit, because the bore center is different. So from corner to corner, it is off a little bit. Now, the idea behind this is you could use all the 460 intakes that are out there. So suddenly you would go from having no intakes available. Remember, this was before Edelbrock. So you went from having basically nothing other than some stock intakes or custom handmade ones, and you could start choosing from all the 460 ones that are out there, and they would just kind of bolt up. Now, Larry made some of these. His favorite was this intake. Now, this is a 460 intake. It's made by Blue Thunder. It's dual quad, dual plane. Now, the interesting thing is this intake flows basically the same as a stock port. And as far as Larry was concerned, after doing a bunch of testing, is he liked this one the best. It gave him 2 carburetors. It gave him about the right flow that matched the head, so that's probably why it ran real well for him. And it looked pretty good. And it was dual plane. And he liked the fact that it was dual plane, because they're hard intakes to make. So the 460 intake goes onto the adapter plate after you bolt the adapter plate to the motor. And you've got gaskets between the adapter and the head, and you've got gaskets between the 460 and the adapter. The bottom is recessed for the crossover that's on the intake. That's the heat crossover, so they had to put a dent in the bottom to clear this part. So the basic adapter plate is about 1 inch thick, just under. They're not very complicated. You could probably make one yourself. There is a company, though I'm not sure if they're still making them, that does billet ones. Little pricey. You could probably buy 2 strips of 20-inch long by maybe 3 or 3.5 tall, 1-inch thick aluminum, and do some carving and make your own if you really wanted to do this. Now, I've been collecting this for years. I was kind of fascinated by this idea early on, and I'm still collecting. I'm working on this one now. This is a Offenhauser, one of those 360 where they split the primary and secondary carb bores so that you had 2 different size runners. Well, I'm cutting all that out and making a bit more of an open intake. Now, these are not perfect. Like I said, you've got a port mismatch. In later years, Larry started making the port bigger on the adapters. And I didn't realize at first what he was trying to do. I have since, when I started looking at this again, I have since realized he was using part of the head runner as extending the adapter plate. And so that way he was able to blend it a little bit better for the port mismatch. And that's actually a good idea. I'm doing that to a set of heads, and it actually is looking pretty good. I haven't finished them up. I want to get this done. I want to get the heads done. That's actually what this motor is being built for, is I want to play with some of these 460 intakes. Now, the idea is, like I've said with the other intakes, is you've got various intakes. They flow different. They'll probably run different. And this way I could kind of maybe pick and choose something that'll work real well. Now, most of these intakes flow more than stock. And I've got all sorts of choices here. You know, I've got the Torquer 2. I've got the original Torquer, which I talked about in one of the previous videos. Now, the original Torquer flows about 260. So that's about the same as a stock head. And it has kind of a flat deal. Now, the thing I got to tell you is even just bolting the adapter plate onto the head where the head port is stock and the adapter plate is meant for a stock port, you lose about 12% of the flow in the port right off the top. So I'm really kind of excited to see, once I get it done, what Larry's later idea was about, because I'm guessing that he managed to get that number down to something a little more sensible. Now, some of these intakes may be a little big. Like I said, you can use any 460 regular intake. I've got a Victor here, but that's going to flow like 420 CFM. So that's a pretty big intake. I've got an Offenhauser Portasonic, but that's still going to be up there at like 300 and something. I think it's on the front. 372. So that still flows a lot. Now that was kind of an interesting intake because it's flared a little bit at one end and it's got kind of a bit of a venturi to the port. That's why it was called the Portasonic. So it'd be kind of interesting to see how that one runs. This one, like I said, I'm opening up the plenum in order to make it, I was actually thinking maybe 3 2-barrel carburetors on this guy. I have an adapter plate on here at the moment that would allow a dominator to work. I'm still working on this intake, but it was just some ideas. I'm not sure how well the dominator would work with fuel distribution, a single carb in the middle, but that was some of the stuff that I could kind of play with. Now, there are other intakes. This is a Motorsport one, cloverleaf style, you know, flows like 344 CFM. Some of these are pretty big intakes. But like I said, the basic idea was you could run a different intake that you couldn't get for the Cadillac. And so it was kind of an interesting idea. Now, the Edelbrock came out, and then we wound up with the Bulldog, and then Potter came out with some intakes, and this idea kind of faded away. Most of the guys that ran it were really just running them to have something look different. It was more street rods. I didn't see a lot on any of the message boards over the years as to somebody that went, wow, you know, this intake really ran great with the adapter and whatnot. Now, I have had people run this particular intake that Larry liked. Now, this one's actually numbered. This one says it was the 8th one that Larry built at the time of this dual quad dual plane. And the adapter plate is marked as the 30th adapter plate that he had. So Larry made a few of some of these, and they're out there kicking around. There was probably one with the Motorsport one here was also a Larry. This one was a Larry built. Now, on the 460 intake, you have a water neck, not neck, but the place for the thermostat and a crossover for water on the 460. It's like other motors like the Chevy where you've got the passage across the front of the intake. So I've been cutting those off and basically taking out as much material as I can, so they're kind of like a air gap manifold. I felt like that made them look a little more presentable, and somebody might not really notice, especially if I paint the adapter plate to where it kind of matches the heads and just have the intake on it. I think it'll kind of disappear, so you can't tell that it was adapted on there as opposed to being. Now, some of them do better than others, but it's really on how much work you want to put into it to clean them up. Now, I'm kind of thinking the Torquer 2 is probably going to be about the best, because like I said, the heads are going to be ported. I'm opening them up to that bigger port that Larry did right towards the end. He enlarged the port entry and tried to blend it better for the intake. And because of that, I expect it to flow a higher number, and I'm thinking the Torquer 2 at 320 CFM is probably a pretty good match for a modified iron head to fit this. The problem is, once I do that, those heads are pretty well married to the adapter plate. So it's then kind of stuck running a 460 intake. If I decide to go to something else, you know, my tunnel ram might fit, maybe, but in all likelihood, I would have to swap the heads off and put a different set of heads on to try and run more of a normal intake. So even if I run this, I'm not going to be able to compare it to like a Edelbrock intake, because it won't just bolt right on without problems. Now, like I said, this is kind of a fascinating idea because it gives you choices. I mean, I've got all sorts of choices here at the moment, and some of them are very cool looking. Larry, like I said, liked this one, so I'm really curious to see how this one runs and how the Torquer runs. Some of these, like the Super Victor, I expected to probably be too big and not really do well at the transition from the intake to the cylinder head. Now, like I said, I haven't had that on the bench yet to see how well it does. I'm still kind of working on the heads. Of course, I'm still working on the motor, and then I started doing all these videos, so things have gotten a bit behind. But I suspect I can't get that kind of CFM out of the port without probably welding on the heads. I mean, you got to remember, I'm not actually changing the head. I'm just cutting it as big as I can get with the material that's there, and mostly just at the port entry. That's just so that it matches better here on the adapter. Now, I know you probably can't see this stuff, and I have posted pictures before, but you know, if you look, there's an angle. I mean, the port entry going to a stock port is really not fantastic. And this is part of the reason why CAD company doesn't really think this is a viable thing anymore. It's something that happened in the past. He's kind of past it. He'd like to see more intakes that are meant for the Cadillac, which is a better idea. But this keeps coming up. Guys ask me about this all the time. You know, what about the 460 adapter? Well, that's basically what the 460 adapter is. Now, all you really have to do is, like I said, the side pieces, which are just under an inch thick. I think I measured most of these at like 960 thousandths. So basically it was an inch thick. Now, there was a company called high tech or something that made some of these. You can go a smidge thicker here. That just is going to push the intake up. There was even one of these adapters I saw one time online where it had wood grain on the aluminum from obviously a wood buck that was made. That might have been that first guy that just went home and started making them and selling them. Larry was not happy, I tell you. But that's the 460 adapter. It's not a very complicated thing. There is a bunch of intakes. I have not run any of this. I'm really kind of interested to see if it works at all. It would be nice to have some other choices or some interesting choices. So anyway, that's the 460 adapter. Very straightforward. You could probably make one if you had to. It's not that complicated of a thing. There are lots of adapter plates that have been made. So if you keep your eyes open, this is what you're looking for. You might see one in a swap meet where somebody doesn't know what it is. If you can spot it, you might be able to do pretty well. There are some of these intakes. I will tell you that this dual quad, dual plane intake from Blue Thunder, some of these are, like I said, some of these are Edelbrock, some of these are Offenhauser, some of these are Motorsport. This is Blue Thunder. This is a very, very expensive intake to be cutting on. Now, I happened to buy this one complete, ready to go, so it was already done by Larry. Some of these other intakes I have bought over the years off of either eBay or swap meets in order to keep the price down. Usually walk past if it wasn't a really smoking deal because I just wanted to play a little bit. I didn't want to have, thousands of dollars into all these intakes that I'm cutting on. So anyway, I wish you luck with your projects. That's the 460 intake adapter to the Cadillac 472-500, and it's kind of an interesting thing. And if somebody's out there that's actually run one of these, leave something in the comments because I have not talked to that many people that have actually had one of these on the car and driven around. And I'd be curious to see what anybody else has to think about this. And at some point, if I can get to it, I'm going to test it myself. And I got plenty of choices. So anyway, wish you luck with the projects. 460 adapter.